My father broke my face with a champagne flute at my own graduation reception. It was a baccarat crystal, heavy enough to shatter bone, and he swung it like he was christening a ship. The blow caught me across the left cheek and nose. I heard the crack before I felt it, a wet structural sound, like stepping on a branch in the rain. Then the pain arrived, white and total, and I was falling backward onto the cake table. Red velvet, white buttercream, my blood turning the icing pink as I slid to the grass. 100 people watched, judges in their robes, law firm partners who'd flown in from Chicago, my professors still wearing their doctoral hoods, my fiancé who would leave me that same night and block my number by morning, and my brother David, my twin, the good son. He stood beside our father with a linen napkin in his hand, not to press against my face, not to staunch the bleeding, but to offer to Dad so he could wipe the champagne off his fingers. Then David looked down at me, his eyes empty of anything I'd ever recognized as love, and said to the security guard already running toward us, "Someone call an ambulance. My sister is clearly intoxicated. She's been making a scene all afternoon." My father adjusted his cufflinks. They were gold, engraved with the scales of justice. He'd worn them to every trial he'd ever won. He looked at the guests. At the cameras the local news had set up to cover the judicial graduate, and he spoke clearly enough for every microphone to catch it. "This woman is a thief. She stole $50,000 from her dying mother. She is not my daughter. She never was, and she does not deserve to stand in this profession." Then he stepped over my legs to get to the bar. And no one stopped him, because he was Judge Richard Hale, and I was just the girl bleeding on the cake. Welcome to Little Bunny Stories. If you're here, maybe you know what it means to be hit by someone who is supposed to protect you. Maybe you know the particular horror of watching your own family choose the lie because it's easier than the truth. Maybe you know what it's like to have your name dragged through the mud while the real criminal shakes hands and accepts campaign donations. If that's you, subscribe. Not because I have comfort, because I have a blueprint. And because the story I'm about to tell you ends with my father dying in a prison infirmary, my brother ringing up gas station lottery tickets, and me standing in a courtroom wearing the same face he broke. Only this time, he was the one on the floor. Here's my story. I was born 7 minutes after David. That 7 minutes was the only time I ever came second to him. In our father's eyes, it defined everything. David was the heir. I was the afterthought. David was the Hale who would carry the name into politics, into the judiciary, into the country clubs where deals were made over steaks and single malt. I was the daughter who should have been grateful for the tuition, the debutante ball, the law school acceptance that Dad could brag about at cocktail parties, until I started believing I deserved to be there for myself. My mother was the only one who saw me. Dr. Alina Hale, née Voss, oncologist, the woman who'd kept her maiden name professionally because she'd worked too hard to bury it under my father's reputation. She was brilliant and exhausted, the kind of exhausted that lives in the hollows beneath your eyes and the way you stop flinching at bad news. She treated cancer patients at County General while Dad presided over civil cases downtown, and she came home smelling like antiseptic and grief. But she always had time for me. She'd sit on the edge of my bed when I was 12, brushing my hair, and say, "Sophie, the law is a weapon. Your father uses it to hurt people. Promise me you'll learn it well enough to use it to stop him." I promised. I didn't know what she meant. I thought she was talking about his defendants. I didn't know she was talking about herself. David and I were close once, in the way that twins are before the world teaches them to compete. We shared a womb, a language, a childhood of secret codes. But Dad invested in him, paid for his prep schools, his networking trips, his internships at firms where names were whispered like prayers. David learned early that loyalty to Dad was currency. I learned that asking questions was expensive. When Mom got sick, pancreatic, stage 3, diagnosed too late because she'd been ignoring her own symptoms while treating everyone else's, Dad handled it the way he handled everything, as a public relations campaign. He held press conferences about our family's strength. He posed for photos at her bedside, her hand in his, her Roman 4 line carefully arranged to catch the light. He started a foundation in her name before she was even dead. The Alina Hale Compassion Fund. It raised $2 million in 6 months. None of it went to her treatment. It went to his senatorial exploratory committee. I was in my 3rd year of law school when she started dying at home. Dad insisted on it. "She'll be comfortable here," he told the cameras. "I'll care for her myself." He hired a private nurse, fired her 3 weeks later, and took over the medications. He administered them with precision, with tenderness, with a devotion that made the local news call him a judge with a heart. I visited every weekend. I watched her fade. I watched her hands shake. I watched her look at me with eyes that seemed to be trying to say something, but her mouth couldn't form the words. 2 weeks before she died, she pulled me into her study when Dad was at a campaign event. She could barely walk. She pressed a key into my palm and whispered, "Safety deposit. First Federal. Box 442. Don't tell him. Don't tell David. When the time comes, you'll know." She didn't explain. I didn't ask. I was too busy watching her die to understand she was arming me. She died on a Tuesday. I was in the middle of a contracts exam. Dad called me 3 hours after it happened. "Your mother passed peacefully," he said, his voice smooth as polished marble. "The funeral is Saturday. Don't wear black." She hated black. Wear the navy suit. The one that photographs well. I wore black. I didn't care about the photographs. I cared about the key burning a hole in my pocket. The reading of the will was a performance. Dad had staged it in his study, with David and me on the leather couch where we'd never been allowed to sit as children. The family lawyer, Dad's law school roommate, his groomsman, his golf partner, read a document that left everything to Richard Hale. The house, the investments, the compassion fund, Mom's medical practice, which Dad liquidated within a month. David got the summer house on the lake. I got my mother's pearl earrings and her best wishes for my future. I didn't argue. I was grieving. I was also in the back of my mind waiting for the right time to use the key, but I didn't get the chance. 3 days after the funeral, Dad called me into his study again. This time, the cameras were off. This time, he was not the grieving widower. He was the judge. $50,000 is missing from your mother's joint account, he said. He slid a bank statement across the desk. It showed a transfer to an account in my name. "You took it the week before she died, while she was unconscious, while I was sleeping." I stared at the paper. "I didn't open this account. I don't know what this is. It's your name, Sophie, your signature, your greed." "Dad, I swear don't." He stood up. He was 6 foot broad-shouldered, the kind of man who filled doorways. "Your mother was dying, and you stole from her, from us, from the foundation that bears her name. Do you understand what you've done? You've made me look like a fool, like a man who can't control his own house. I didn't. If you fight me, I will destroy you." He leaned over the desk. His aftershave smelled like pine and power. "I will make sure you never practice law. I will make sure no firm in this state will hire you. I will make sure the only job you can get is serving coffee to people like me. Do you understand?" I understood. I also understood, looking at his face, that he believed what he was saying, or he needed to believe it, because the alternative was that he was the thief, and Judge Richard Hale did not steal. He sentenced thieves. I left the house that night with nothing but my law books and the key still hidden in the lining of my purse. I didn't go to the safety deposit box. I was afraid. I was ashamed. I thought, in the twisted logic of a daughter who has been trained to doubt herself, that maybe I had done it. Maybe I'd sleepwalked through the theft. Maybe I was the monster he said I was. I threw myself into my final semester. I graduated top 5% of my class. I accepted a ring from a man who loved the idea of my father more than he loved me. And I told myself that if I could just become a lawyer, if I could just prove myself worthy, Dad would see that I wasn't a thief, that I was his daughter after all. I was an idiot, but I was a useful idiot because my graduation gave him the stage he needed. The reception was held in the garden behind the law school, under a tent strung with lights that looked like stars if you didn't look too close. I was wearing my gown, my hood, the pearl earrings that were my only inheritance. My fiancé was holding my hand. David was holding a scotch and laughing with a state senator. Dad was holding court at the head table, accepting congratulations on raising such a fine legal mind, referring to David, who'd graduated 5 years earlier, but everyone nodded like he meant me too. I was happy. That's the part that still makes me sick. For 10 minutes I was happy. I had my degree. I had my life ahead of me. I was going to work at the public defender's office, the way Mom would have wanted. I was going to be good. Then Dad walked over. His smile was still in place, but his eyes were wrong, dark. The way they got when he was about to deliver a sentence he knew was excessive but justified. "Sophie," he said, "walk with me." I walked. He gripped my upper arm, his fingers digging into the nerve, and pulled me toward the center of the tent. The cake table, the photographers, the eyes, Richard, my fiancé's voice, confused, trailing off. Dad reached for a champagne flute on the table. He didn't drink from it. He turned, and he swung it at my face. The world went red. I remember the sound of my own blood hitting the tablecloth. I remember David's voice, calm and clinical. Someone call an ambulance. My sister is clearly intoxicated. I remember the napkin, white linen, pressed into Dad's hand by my brother's steady fingers. I remember the flash of cameras, not for the graduate, but for the spectacle. The girl on the ground, the judge standing over her, the narrative writing itself in real time. I was removed by security. Not Dad, me, the intoxicated woman, the thief, the disgrace. My fiancé's ring arrived in the mail 3 days later, no note. My job offer from the public defender's office was rescinded by email. Given recent allegations, we must reconsider. My name appeared on legal blogs under headlines like Graduate Accused of Matricidal Theft and Hail Family Drama, A Fall from Grace. Dad gave a statement to the press, dignified, grieving. I loved my daughter, but I love justice more. She will not be practicing law in this state. I had $23 in my checking account, a broken face, and a key. The year that followed was a study in erasure. I lived in a studio apartment the size of a parking space, with roaches that didn't scatter when I turned on the light because they knew I had no power. I worked as a paralegal for a personal injury firm that paid me in cash and asked no questions. I wore a surgical mask in public, not because of illness, but because my face was still healing. The orbital fracture had required titanium plates. The nose reconstruction took 3 surgeries. The scar above my left eyebrow, from the champagne flute stem, never fully faded. It sits there now, a thin white line, my own private brand. I didn't go to the safety deposit box. Not yet. I was still afraid. Still convinced in the darkest hours of the morning that Dad was right, that I'd stolen the money, that I deserved the broken face. Then Maria found me. She was a nurse at County General, one of the ones who'd been fired after Mom's death. She'd spoken up about the medication schedules, about the thallium levels in Mom's blood work that no one had ordered tested, about the way Judge Hale had personally administered his wife's injections and refused to let anyone else touch the vials. Maria found me at the courthouse where I was filing motions for my boss. She waited until I stepped out into the rain, then fell into step beside me. "You're Sophie Hale," she said. "Not a question. I don't go by that name anymore. Your mother knew." At the end, she knew what he was doing. "She gave me something to give you if you survived." She handed me an envelope. Inside was a key, the same key I realized that Mom had given me, but with a note this time. Her handwriting shaky but fierce. "If you are reading this, he has already hit you. He planned to." I saw it in his eyes when I refused to sign the new will. "Do not seek justice in his court. Build your own. The box has everything. Use it when you are ready. Not before. He must not see you coming." I went to First Federal that afternoon, box 442. I sat in the private room with the metal drawer open, and I cried for the first time since the graduation, not because of what was inside, but because of what it meant. My mother had known she was dying. She had known he would kill her, and she had spent her last weeks not fighting for her life, but fighting for mine. Inside the box was a second will handwritten, dated 3 weeks before her death, witnessed by Maria and a notary who'd since moved to Oregon. It left everything to me: the house, the practice, the money, but more importantly, it contained a file. A thick manila envelope labeled, in Mom's precise doctor's script, "Richard, for the FBI or for you." The file was a diary of murder. Mom had documented Dad's acceptance of bribes from Meridian Pharmaceuticals, a conglomerate facing hundreds of negligence lawsuits. Dad had dismissed 3 of those cases in the last 2 years, always with legal reasoning so airtight it couldn't be appealed, always with timing that coincided with deposits into an offshore account. The account was in David's name. David, who managed the family investments. David, who'd held the napkin. But the worst part was the medical evidence. Mom had saved tissue samples from her own body. She'd sent them to a private lab with a note: "Test for heavy metals. Do not contact my home." The results were clear. Thallium poisoning, administered in small doses over 6 months, mixed into the experimental treatment Dad had insisted on giving her at home. Thallium mimics the symptoms of advanced cancer. It causes hair loss, nerve damage, organ failure. It accelerates the disease it pretends to be. Mom had cancer. But Dad had made sure she didn't survive it. And the $50,000. It was a trust Mom had established in secret, funded by her own savings, to open a free cancer clinic for uninsured women. Dad had found the paperwork, drained the account, and funneled the money into his senatorial campaign. Then he'd blamed me, because blaming me was cleaner than explaining where the money went, because I was disposable, because I was the daughter. I sat in that bank room for 3 hours. I read every page. I photographed everything with my phone. And when I walked out, I was no longer Sophie Hale. I was Sophie Voss, my mother's daughter, and I was ready. I didn't go to the police. Dad had friends in the DA's office, in the state police, in the FBI field office. He had judges who owed him favors, politicians who'd endorsed his campaign, journalists who'd eaten at his table. A direct attack would fail. I needed to become something he couldn't see coming. I needed to become a lawyer. I recertified under my mother's name. I passed the bar again, technically, since I'd already passed, but this time I filed the paperwork quietly, in a different district, with a judge who didn't owe Richard Hale anything. I took a job at a small civil rights firm that specialized in pharmaceutical litigation. I was overqualified and underpaid, and I worked 16-hour days learning the Meridian cases inside out. And I waited for my opening. It came 6 months later. Dad announced his candidacy for the U.S. Senate, his platform, judicial reform, family values, and protecting the integrity of our medical institutions. He hired a campaign team. He needed legal advisors. He needed someone young, hungry, willing to work pro bono for the exposure. I applied through an intermediary. Maria's cousin worked on the campaign. I sent a resume with a different first name, Sophia, not Sophie, and a carefully constructed background that emphasized my pharmaceutical litigation experience. I didn't mention my relationship to the candidate. I didn't mention the graduation. I wore my hair differently. I colored the gray that had started coming in after the attack. I wore glasses I didn't need and a smile I'd practiced in the mirror until it reached my eyes without touching my soul. They hired me. Of course they did. I was brilliant, cheap, and female, the perfect diversity hire for a campaign photo op. I spent 6 months in the trenches. I reviewed contracts. I organized fundraisers. I sat in meetings where Dad discussed message discipline and optics and never once looked at me as anything other than a competent staffer. I was invisible. I was furniture. I was exactly what I needed to be, and I documented everything. Every donation that exceeded legal limits, every promise made to a pharmaceutical lobbyist in exchange for future legislative support, every offshore transfer, every shell company, every lie told to the FEC. I saved it all to 3 encrypted drives. I mailed copies to my lawyer, to Maria, to a journalist at the Tribune who'd been trying to break the Meridian story for 2 years. But the real weapon wasn't the corruption. It was the case. Dad, as a sitting federal judge, was scheduled to preside over the final dismissal hearing in Hartwell v. Meridian Pharmaceuticals. It was the largest class action suit against the company, 400 plaintiffs claiming that Meridian's chemotherapy drug, Cytotrom, caused secondary cancers when combined with common homeopathic treatments. Dad had already dismissed 2 related cases. He was poised to kill this one too, with a summary judgment that would shield Meridian from liability forever. What Dad didn't know, what no one knew, was that I'd joined the plaintiff's legal team 6 weeks earlier, under a sealed identity, as the lead representative plaintiff. I'd found 3 other women whose mothers had died under similar circumstances, women whose mothers had been treated by Dad's preferred oncologists, women whose medical records showed the same thallium markers. We'd filed a motion to add new evidence, a study showing that Cytotrom interacted fatally with thallium-based compounds, creating a carcinogenic effect that mimicked natural disease progression. A study that Dad had buried in his chambers 2 years ago, after receiving it from a whistleblower he'd since disbarred. Dad couldn't recuse himself. If he did, he'd have to explain why, and the explanation would expose his relationship with Meridian. He couldn't dismiss the case, because the new evidence created a genuine dispute of material fact that no summary judgment could resolve. And he couldn't let it go to trial, because discovery would open his financial records, his communications, his entire corrupt architecture to public scrutiny. He was trapped, and I was the trap. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday, televised. Dad loved cameras. He'd built his career on them, and now they would destroy him. I arrived at the courthouse at 8:00 a.m. I wore a charcoal suit cut sharp with a silk blouse the color of dried blood. My hair was pulled back so tight it hurt. My glasses were thick, black, serious. I looked like a different woman. I was a different woman, the courtroom filled. The plaintiff's gallery was packed with women in headscarves, in wigs, in the visible armor of illness. The defense team sat at the meridian table, confident, expensive, bored. Dad entered from his chambers at 9 a.m. sharp, his robes immaculate, his face composed in the expression of judicial neutrality he'd perfected over decades. He didn't look at me. Why would he? I was just another lawyer. Another woman in a suit. The hearing began. Meridian's counsel moved for dismissal. They argued that the new evidence was inadmissible, that the study was flawed, that the plaintiffs were chasing conspiracy theories. It was a strong argument. It would have worked against any other judge, but Dad wasn't any other judge. He was the man who'd buried the study, and I was about to make him dig it up. When it was my turn, I stood. I approached the lectern. I adjusted my papers, and then slowly I removed my glasses. I set them on the wood. I unbuttoned my coat and let it fall from my shoulders. The courtroom was silent. Dad's pen stopped moving. He looked at me, really looked. And I saw the moment he knew. The blood drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. His hand gripped the edge of the bench, knuckles white, the same hand that had held the champagne flute 18 months ago. "Counselor," he said, his voice a croak. "You look familiar, Your Honor," I said, and my voice was steady, clear, loud enough for the cameras. "I am Sophie Voss. Nay Hale. I am the daughter of Alina Voss, whose tissue samples are Exhibit A in the evidence before you. I am the woman you accused of theft at my own graduation. I am the woman whose face you broke with a champagne flute while my brother handed you a napkin." The gallery gasped. The defense counsel sat up straight. The journalists in the back row started typing furiously. "And I am here," I continued, "to prove that the drug you are protecting killed my mother. Not because it was defective, but because you knew it interacted with thallium. Because you administered that thallium to her yourself. And because you have been accepting bribes from Meridian Pharmaceuticals to bury the evidence." I turned to the clerk. "I would like to enter into evidence defense Exhibit 47A through 47M, financial records showing transfers from Meridian's subsidiary, Helix Holdings, to an account in the Cayman Islands held by David Hale. I would like to enter Exhibit 48, the sworn testimony of Dr. Patricia Ewan, the whistleblower you disbarred, regarding the suppressed study. And I would like to enter Exhibit 49, the second will of Alina Voss, witnessed by Maria Santos and Notary Public James Liu, which leaves her entire estate to me, not to you, and which explicitly names you as her murderer." Dad stood up. His robes swayed. His face was purple. This is an outrage. You are in contempt." "I am not in contempt, Your Honor, you are." I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a manila envelope. "This is a federal restraining order, signed by Judge Amanda Reeves of the 7th Circuit, prohibiting you from coming within 50 feet of me. It was issued this morning, based on evidence of your prior assault and ongoing harassment. And this," I pulled out another document, "is a warrant for your arrest, issued by the United States Attorney's Office, for the murder of Alina Voss, wire fraud, bribery, and obstruction of justice." The courtroom doors opened. 2 marshals entered. One of them walked toward the bench. The other walked toward the gallery where David was already standing, his phone in his hand, his face the color of old milk. "David Hale," the marshal said, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and accessory to murder. You have the right to remain silent." David dropped his phone. It cracked on the marble floor. He looked at Dad, who was still standing behind the bench, trembling, and then at me. For a second I saw the boy I'd shared a womb with, the boy who'd taught me to ride a bike, the boy who'd chosen the napkin. Then they put him in handcuffs. Live, on camera. Dad didn't go quietly, he never did. He came around the bench, his robes flapping, his face twisted in the same rage I'd seen at the graduation. He walked toward me with his hand raised. He was going to hit me again. I knew it, he knew it, the cameras knew it. But this time I didn't flinch. "The last time you hit me," I said, my voice carrying through the microphone, through the cameras, through the airwaves. "I bled on my graduation gown. This time you're bleeding on your own record, and I don't need a napkin." The marshal intercepted him 3 feet from me. Dad swung anyway, his fist catching empty air, and then he was on the ground, a federal judge in a pile of black robes, screaming that I was a liar, a thief, a disgrace to the family name. I stepped over his legs to get to the exit, just like he'd stepped over mine. The trial took 8 months. Dad tried to use every connection he had, but the evidence was too much. The financial records, the thallium, the whistleblower, the will. He was convicted of first-degree murder, bribery, and fraud. He died in a federal prison 2 years later, waiting for an appeal that never came. The official cause was heart failure. The unofficial cause, whispered by the guards, was that he spent his last month screaming about a girl in a graduation gown who wouldn't stop bleeding on his floor. David took a plea. He lost his law license, his marriage, his house. Last I heard, he was working the register at a gas station off the interstate, ringing up lottery tickets and energy drinks. I don't visit him. I don't send cards. He made his choice when he handed Dad that napkin. The money from the offshore accounts, recovered by the government, then released to the rightful heirs under Mom's will, didn't come to me. I transferred every penny to the foundation I'd established. Elena's House, a free cancer clinic in the heart of the city, staffed by doctors who treat every patient like a person, not a case. We specialize in women who have been told they are too poor, too sick, too difficult to save. We save them anyway. I run the legal clinic next door. We represent women who have been hit by men who are supposed to love them. Women who have been called crazy, thieves, liars. Women who need someone to believe them before they believe themselves. Every year, on the anniversary of my graduation, I fund an anonymous scholarship for survivors of domestic violence who want to study law. The letter is always the same. For the girl who bled on her gown and learned to use the law as a tourniquet. I still have the scar above my eyebrow. I don't cover it with makeup. It's my reminder, not of what he took, of what I survived, of what I built from the broken pieces. I'm Sophie. I'm 28 years old. I'm a lawyer, a daughter, a survivor of a father who broke my face and a brother who held the cloth to clean the blood. I am the woman who walked back into his courtroom and made him the defendant. If someone has convinced you that you deserve to bleed, that your pain is drama, that your truth is lies, that your survival is an inconvenience, stay. Stay long enough to learn the law they use against you. Stay long enough to turn their weapons into your evidence. Stay long enough to stand in their courtroom and speak your name so loud they have to hear it. See you in the next story.